Hey everyone, and welcome to another Learning Tech Talks where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. I'm looking forward to today. We are going to be talking about a very ambiguous topic that is critical to organizations, but I think there's just a lot of mystery around it. And so we're going to try and unpack it. And that topic today is the topic of wellness and what that means, what it looks like, how we do this well in an organization. And so to help me navigate that one, I'm joined by Jessie Pagliari. And I hope I pronounced that right. I've been saying the last name. I've known you and your family for some time, so I would be mortified if I mispronounced it. But thank you so much, Jessie, for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Christopher. And yes, you nailed the last name, Pagliari.
Good. I would be, like I said, I would be mortified. Well, so for those who may not know you, this is going to be a big topic, and the fact we're going to try and fit it into an hour, I think is going to be difficult, but that's true of just about every one of my long form conversations. But for those who don't know who you are, tell me a little bit about your background and really how that ended up connecting to the whole wellness topic.
Absolutely. So, first off, hi everyone. My name is Jessie. Really excited to be here with you today. I previously worked in sales at a large organization, and there I developed corporate burnout, which then led to a medical leave and then a sabbatical from work.
When you said you developed corporate burnout, I thought you meant like the program. I'm like, wait, you experienced it.
I experienced firsthand.
You experienced it. Yes, you didn't make it. You did not create this issue that we have in organizations. Got it.
No, actually, I didn't. I experienced burnout firsthand. So if you're listening today and you're feeling some burnout, I'm right there with you. But yeah, I had to go on a medical leave, and then I learned that I developed stress-related illness. So I took some time away from work to deal with that, and it ended up resulting in a sabbatical from work altogether. And in my time away from work, I got my master's in communication. I got certified in yoga, breathwork, and meditation. And then I also got stress management certified at the Mayo Clinic. So all of these experiences sort of came together.
Doesn't sound like a very relaxing sabbatical, by the way. Like, I mean, you're on a break from work and you do a master's program, you get all these certifications. So that's a pretty active sabbatical, if I must say.
It was good. I mean, honestly, my focus the whole time was healing myself. And then what I learned throughout the time was that, oh, wow, there's so many other people that can benefit from this knowledge that I could help.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you didn't burn yourself out on your sabbatical from burnout. That would have been the ultimate kick in the teeth.
I know, right?
Yeah. Okay. So through this experience though, and obviously I think this ties to some of what drives you a little bit. So you went on this initially as a bit of your own like recovery journey from what you'd experienced from the corporate burnout that you were going through. And then through that process went, wait a minute, as I'm going through this, I actually might be able to help other people with what I'm learning through this journey. And you went all in on it to do grad school and all this other stuff. You weren't just like, hey, I have like this crazy idea type of a thing. It was a passion point for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw the numbers. This is from Gallup. 8 in 10 people are experiencing burnout all or some days of the week. So that's a lot of people that are, hurting from burnout. And the biggest thing for me was I experienced this loss of identity. I had so much identified as being like a hard worker and achieving at work. And then when I was burnt out, I was making more errors and having this mental distance from work that are all pieces of burnout. And so when I look at those numbers, 8 in 10 people are affected by this or feeling this way all or some days. I really thought, okay, here's a big opportunity to help people feel better and show up as their best self at home and at work.
Got it. Well, and so so I want to tie to this, but I'm guessing then went from, hey, I'm doing this master's program, I'm doing these other things to help crack some of this stuff and help that. And is that what then turned into Every Day Bliss Company? Was you said, you know what, rather than go back to the traditional job path I had, let me take all these new skills, this new passion that I have, let me take that and turn it into something different. Is that kind of the trajectory of what happened?
That's exactly right. Yeah. I
Okay.
looked at different wellness programs that different organizations had in place or that I had experienced firsthand as an employee. And I saw the gaps. And really, one of the big things with Everyday Bliss Co. is that we have evidence-based preventative strategies and techniques that we deliver to employees. So that way they can manage their own wellness and then improve overall wellness at an organization. So yes, that was the I was able to sort of heal myself. And then I realized, if other people had this knowledge in their hands, they could be able to better manage their wellness and improve, their overall sense of identity and worth in life.
Which I love founder stories where that's at the root of where it's coming from versus like, hey, I want to do something different and make money doing it type of a thing, where it really is more of a, you see it, you've personally experienced it, and you've got some skin in the game. Like for you, trying to help other organizations solve this problem, it's not just about how you pay your bills, but really it's a personal experience. It's something that you see that you can bring to others. But what was interesting about what you said in your experience with this, and even just talking, first of all, 8 and 10, that's a pretty I guess it's staggering. It doesn't surprise me when I see some of the engagement statistics and when you read some of the stats on the overall mental health crisis we're going through, the loneliness epidemic that we're having. I mean, there's a lot of symptoms that you're seeing. So it doesn't surprise me. But when you really think about that, when 8 out of every 10 people are experiencing this, and what was interesting about what you said is the fact that some of the very things that contribute to being burned out, trying to insert those in actually can contribute, if you don't get it right, to feeling more frustrated. Because going back to your point, if you're a high performer, telling somebody you need to take a break can almost bring up these feelings of, okay, but now I'm not doing anything, which means I'm not performing well, which then can almost just cause a bit of a mental crisis in and of itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's about giving people the right tools that will actually give them a return. When I say return, it'll give them results and make them feel better. So that way they keep coming back to these tools and then they can show up how they want to, both at work and at home. A lot of times, an organization may throw out a happy hour or a yoga event or, a healthy lunch. These are all great things and they have really great intention behind them. But if someone is chronically burnt out, they're overwhelmed, they have too much on their schedule, then these may feel like just one more thing to do. And it's not giving them that return on their investment in these events where they're leaving the event feeling better. So that's really the root of wellness, is getting people the tool that they need so they can feel better.
Well, and I think something in what you described, and if you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear some of this from you. But some of what you're describing, and I think this is where I've seen wellness efforts fall short, and this is something we see in the learning and development space, is when they're treated like an event versus a process. Like it's not something that, hey, we did, like you said, a healthy lunch, or we did Thursday yoga. Like I'm sure now everybody's well and feeling good and all the burnout has been cured. That's not really the way it works. And so I'm really curious, like for you, as you look at even maybe reflections on your own journey or journeys you've seen with others, what can that process look like? Because I can see, and this is some of the reactions I see from folks when we talk about this topic, is like you said, it can almost feel like more work. Like, oh my gosh, I don't have time for that. I'm so burned out doing all these other things. Now you're asking me to do this other stuff on top of it. What does that process look like, and how do you help get over that hump?
Yeah. So the number one thing that organizations can do is talk to their people. I have been a partner with some of my clients where I've gone in and I've actually talked to people one-on-one and learned about how they're feeling, what they're dealing with, what their day-to-day looks like, what their mindset looks like. And then we also did a survey in tandem with that to understand, what the wellness looks like across the entire organization. And leaders were just blown away. They had no idea what their people were going through. And so once you have a better understanding of what they're going through, you're going to realize, oh wait, a yoga event is not going to help, this person who's losing sleep over work or not able to eat because they're so stressed out. So then once you have the right information, you can start to act and get the right tools in place to help your employees. So I would say step number one is always going to be talking to your people managers, individual contributors, leaders, and really just understanding where their own personal wellness is at to get a bigger picture of where wellness is at within the organization.
So let's start with that first step, because
Okay.
if I think about some of the conversations I'm in with, HR leaders, business leaders, things like this, there may be some things in organizations that are happening.
Yeah.
Maybe. You may have engagement surveys, you may have things going on that maybe give you some indicators,
Mhm.
but where do you see some of the biggest gaps in that space when it comes to the listening? Because first of all, I think it's hilarious. Not this situation isn't hilarious, but as I think about the AI age and all this other stuff, that one of the root things that we need more of is human connection. And you
Yeah.
just hit on it right there, where it's like, well, one of the first steps in dealing with this is actually connecting with your people in a real way, not a robotic, here, tell this chatbot what's wrong with you type of thing, but actually talking to your people. So what do you see some of the gaps right now as you look at how organizations may be trying to assess this situation, or maybe they're not at all? Maybe your answer is, honestly, most organizations that you encounter aren't actually taking an intentional look at this area.
Yeah. So most organizations that I work with have the best intentions. They want to uncover, but they don't know where to
Okay.
start. And this
Okay.
really is a challenge. One of the stats I always cite is, I think it's, let me just pull it up right here. 49% of millennials and Gen Z don't feel safe to talk about wellness at work. So even if you are having
Really?
those conversations, or surveys, you may not be getting the full picture because people don't feel that safety to actually discuss what's really going on. So that's really where I have come in the past and been this third party. And of course, you can create this within your own organization with your own people as well. But really saying, okay, this is a confidential space. What you say will not be shared here. Like, I am just here to check in on you at this moment, and I want to see how you are doing and feeling.
Okay.
This isn't going to affect anything outside of these four walls. So creating that really safe space where people can be open to share how they're actually feeling. And as a manager, one of the things you can do is really role model that behavior. So being open about your own wellness journey, even if you're feeling great.
So I'm actually curious about this. As you've had some of these conversations, because it's a fascinating statistic. And one thing that I agree with you on that sometimes doesn't always come out in, media or things like that, is that I agree that most senior leaders, most companies that I've talked to, that I've worked in, they really, to your point, they have good intentions. Like, it's not, sometimes there's this, mosaic of like, corporate leadership is just like, I don't care about my people, sitting in a dark conference room, plotting. And it's like, that's rarely ever the case. They're people too. And they usually generally, there's always exceptions to the rule, but I would say in general, they do have a genuine concern for these things and they want to do better. But to your point, they don't know where to start. I'm curious if you've seen in some of these conversations, because the fact that many people, even if asked, would be like, yeah, I don't really feel like I could tell the truth about this anyway. Have you seen any themes in what contributes to that? Because that may sound overwhelming for some organizations where it's like, well, man, so like, where do we even start? Because if people aren't even comfortable, and I think you gave some hints at what you can do to, help make it a safe space. But have you seen any themes as to what contributes to that? Is it just not, people aren't used to it, not comfortable? Like, where does that come in?
Well, I think there's a generational gap, first of all, on how different generations look at wellness. There's also a gender gap, how different genders look at wellness, and then how different ethnicities look at wellness. So there can be a lot of stigma around wellness, even if you have the most forward thinking, open organization of all time. If someone grew up in a family where it was not okay to talk about their wellness, or not okay to say, I don't feel well,
they're not okay.
They're not okay, then that person's going to bring that stigma to work. So a lot of it is going to deal with your own personal conditioning based on your background and how you grew up, where you grew up, and what feels true for you. So that is definitely a thing. But that said, this is where that role modeling comes in. If you have a manager or someone in your organization who looks like you, sounds like you, talks like you, and they are able to share openly and talk about wellness and have these open dialogues, you may feel more empowered then to go ahead and share. where I see it falling to the wayside is really these like hustle and grind cultures where people don't feel that they have a second to stop and assess themselves. That I think is where burnout is
Oh,
probably the most prevalent, because people don't even realize that they themselves are burnt out. So they
they're
don't
so
even,
busy running on the treadmill that like there's not even time to go, I am shot right
right,
now.
exactly. They don't have the tools to actually open the wellness survey. And when they ask the question, how are you feeling? They're just going to click, okay, fine, because they haven't assessed themselves to know how they themselves are feeling. So that's something I run into a lot, is people don't have the tools to self-assess because they don't pause to have that moment of
Let's,
reflection.
so I got two things to add to what you're saying, and I'm curious your reaction to this. So one of
Yeah.
them was, this would be a message to the folks who listen and watch this who are in leadership positions, because I personally see this a lot where leaders will send the message, hey, it's okay if you're not okay. It's okay if, you need space, but there's still very much like a leadership mindset that like, but it's not okay for me not to be okay. So to your point of modeling, we're trying to like encourage people like, hey, I know you might be struggling with things, da, 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 but we're still putting out this image of, but I've got it all together. Like
Right.
I'm never dealing with any of these things, which I think sometimes we forget, the higher up you are, the further your voice carries. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you're saying, I want you to do this, but I'm not going to, there is this subtle message being sent that, well, but if you actually want to succeed, you kind of need to get to a point where you arrive like I have. And that can inadvertently make people go, well, I don't want to be the one to go, I'm not okay, because clearly the person, they're saying it's okay, but really is it, because we're not seeing the same thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. So something that a leader can do in terms of modeling is even saying, I don't take back-to-back meetings. I always have 5 minutes to gather myself between meetings. Or, I am putting my workout publicly on my calendar for you to see because it's valuable for me to exercise during the day at the time that works for me. So whatever that motion is, however you are taking care of yourself during the day, whatever it is, letting your team in on that, letting your people in on that so they can see, oh, my leader is taking time to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
I now have permission to do the same.
Yeah. Well, no, and you see other things like this too. And over the years, I've seen this all the time where leaders are like, I really want you to take time off and be disconnected. But then that same leader is shooting off emails and sending texts and messages when they're on vacation. And it's like, well,
Right.
okay, you're saying it's okay for me to do it, but what you're modeling for me is that it's actually not okay. And I think sometimes it's very easy to miss that we send, as people managers and especially in more senior leadership positions, we may inadvertently be contributing to some of the culture that we supposedly are trying to fix, because we go, well, we don't want this in the culture. It's like, well, you got to fix it in yourself. But I'm curious to that reflection point. You brought up some of the tools you use to help people with this, because we're so often running so quick, we don't take the time. Do you see that as a consistent issue? Because I know one of the most valuable things I do is I'm really intentional about taking time to sit and be still and process some of the stuff that, like, a lot of times you actually don't want to think about, because you're like, I actually don't want to deal with this. I just want to keep moving and I just want to pretend like it's not really there.
Yeah.
And forcing myself to sit in that, it does not come naturally, but it is one of the most valuable things that I do, where it forces me to process even just like, how am I really feeling about this right now? Or what is going on, so that I can work through this on the other side. And is that something that you see as an opportunity area that comes through some of the work you're doing?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm like just electric that you said that. And that's a perfect example of something that you can share with your team that you do during the day or whenever it is to take care of yourself, that they could then model as well if you haven't already, which I'm sure you have. But yes, like in this technology forward era, nobody takes time to process. And that's why I'm so excited that you said that.
No.
Like I have a tough meeting, and to then like numb out almost or feel better, I go on social media or I turn on
Yeah.
Netflix or I go to my next task of, putting the laundry in or sending an email or whatever. So yes, people are absolutely numbing out. They're not taking that time to process. And, our minds are not computers. We can't just constantly be
No.
taking in information. We actually do need that time to process and to let it, really marinate before we can move on to the next thing. If we want to have, great ideas, or if we want to show up and really contribute. So that is huge. And yes, that is absolutely a challenge right now, as people are not taking that time to process. And if they do have breaks, they're not able to use them appropriately to help them because they don't have the tools.
So on that one, I'm curious, what are some of the things that you see? Because I'll just share, like, with my journey. That's not always a very comfortable and easy place to sit. Because like I said, there's a reason a lot of times we fill ourselves with activity, because we don't want to think about the hard things, or we don't want to deal with the stuff that's like actually weighing us down. And when we're busy and active and we're numb, we don't have to deal with it. And especially initially, that can almost feel overwhelming, where you actually sit and be still and kind of go, I just need to, and all of a sudden you go, holy cow, like, I don't know. Now, granted, I've been doing this for a long time, so I've been able to work through that. But as you work with people who may just be getting started on this journey, what are some things that work well? Because that can be extremely terrifying if you are in this space and for the first time you actually are still and process what's going on. It can almost send you the other way, like starting to work out and you get super sore and you just go, yeah, I'm never going to do that again.
Yeah. So I have this worksheet and I can share it to your audience after this, but really it's called Identifying Your Brand of Stress. So how is stress affecting you? And what most people don't realize is that stress affects us in 4 categories: physical, mental, emotional, and social. So when we're thinking about physical, that can be like that headache or weight change or digestive issues. Mental could be forgetfulness or dull senses or poor concentration, low productivity. Emotional could be anxiety, mood swings, temper, lashing out. And then social could be like more isolating, loneliness, or like clamming up in these social situations. So what I have people do is actually go through this worksheet and just check what is true for you right now. And that to me is a easier way to check in than having someone try to unpack all of their negative thoughts, because to your point, that can be very painful.
Oh yeah. I mean, it can cripple you. Like if you aren't ready
crippling.
for it, it can be like, I just can't even deal with this. And then you can go back even worse than you were before.
Yeah. So I like this worksheet because you can get into the body and be very objective and say, yeah, this is what I'm experiencing. And then move to, what's causing this. So then looking at, okay, mindset is a challenge that I have, or, relationships at work or at home as a challenge that I have that is causing me stress. So really getting into your brand of stress first before you go to those causes, just so you're not stagnated.
Okay. No, this is really helpful talking through some of these things. And so something else that came to mind as we're talking about some of this stuff that I like that you brought up that can be difficult for people to wrangle. And I think we saw some of this shift during the time of the pandemic. I think it really came to light. But so often we try to compartmentalize our work life and our personal life. And we don't want those things to mix. And I think over the past few years, whether you wanted to or not, they just got mashed together in a, food processor. Right. But that's, I think, been challenging for some folks, because the reality is, and I've had conversations recently with folks, you cannot pretend your personal life does not influence how you show up at work and some of these other things. And that can be a difficult space to navigate depending on the culture you're in. So for me, I work from home. I have 7 kids. Like the culture I lead is kind of like, look, it's life. There's not a work life and a personal life. There's just life. And there's days you just got into it with your spouse. And so you're coming into a meeting and you're just like, I'm not fully here because of, that type of a thing, and dealing with that. But do you see that becoming something that people are having to work through as they look at this? Is how do you also bleed into that? Because even one of the things you said earlier in the conversation, part of why people don't always have psychological safety is it may be tied to the way you were raised. Like it may not even have anything to do with your organization. You may have just been brought up in an environment where talking about your feelings was a no-no. And so now you come to work going, well, I don't even have the tools or the skills to be able to do that in a work environment because of that. So how do you see those two things intersecting?
Yeah. So what I hear a lot from people is, I had no idea how this was affecting me. So they had no idea that all this stress from work was putting a strain on their relationships, or vice
Yeah.
versa. I had no idea all the stress at home was
Yeah,
putting
it
this,
goes both ways.
right,
You can
putting this
take the
strain
work
on
home and
their
it can destroy your personal life, or you can take your personal life to work and it can destroy your work life.
Yes, absolutely. So I see that all the time. And one of the things that I help to recommend with employees is having these micro moments where you are like pausing and closing down one part of your day before you go into the next moment. So at the end of the
Okay.
workday, if you want to stop thinking about work, having this micro moment where you have this reflection, it could be, doing breath, doing meditation, or writing your to-do list for the next day. So that way you can mentally close down as much as possible before you go into that next segment of your day, which could be more personal life.
Okay. Do you see some of the because like for some folks situations who are watching and listening, and I mean, heck, I'm hosting and I'm in this situation where it can be very difficult to have nice clean lines where you go, okay. And that's one thing. I've been in environments where I've gone into the office, I've been in environments where I haven't. I've been all over the map, and there is something, and I do know some folks in my spheres who part of the reason they enjoy going into the office is it does create in some ways this boundary where they go, you know what, when I leave, part of the reason I like my commute is I'm shutting down my work so that I can go home and be more cognitively present. My concern with that is that sometimes you can think that activity will automatically do that, and it won't, because based on what you're saying, it's actually that intentional moment of going, I need to consciously think about doing this. It's not just, oh, I happen to drive home, so that will happen naturally. You can still bring all your baggage from work home with a commute and going to the office. It doesn't just happen because, oh, well, I went to the office, that'll fix it. Like if you don't deal with some of this stuff in yourself, it's not going to fix itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this example is perfect. Let's talk about like the nervous system for a second. And for those listening who maybe are hearing this for the first time, I'll just give like a little overview. So our nervous system is what decides our stress response. So should we be in fight or flight, which you may have heard of, you experience something
Oh yeah.
stressful and your nervous system becomes really activated and you're really just thinking about surviving rather than thriving.
Yep.
Or should we be
Yep.
in rest and digest, which is where we can think more creatively, interact well with others, and we don't perceive any threats around us. So in that drive home, if the person is maybe listening to their favorite song, relaxing, they have the window down and they're really calming down, that can, and breathing deeply, of course, that can trigger that rest and digest response, where then they can show up at home and be more relaxed and be more present. But if in that same car ride home, the person
Right.
is spiraling, thinking about the meeting that they had, and so and so did this today, and it really wound them up, it can actually make them more activated and send them into a deeper
Yeah.
state of fight or flight. So then when they get home, they are activated, they're lashing out, maybe they're experiencing some of those emotional and social symptoms that we talked about when we're assessing our brand of stress. And so when we're thinking about clean lines, it's not so much separating work from home. For me, it's more separating, okay, I'm activated right now. I'm in a stressed out state and I want to change that. I want to go into a less activated state. I want to go into rest and digest. So that for me is the clean line, is saying, okay, I'm going to turn off the stress response right now. So that way I can be more present in this next activity. And if I get an email or a call or whatever, then I'm already calm to deal with that and then hang back up and get back to my personal life, whatever it is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I like it. By the way, boss, it's a fair point, right?
Yeah.
Driving home is not necessarily always relaxing. But
Yeah.
what you brought up, Jessie, with this, and I think this is something that, I wrote a book called Relentless Intention. And
Mm.
the reason for that is exactly what you're talking about is activity in and of itself does not necessarily bring the same outcome. It's really the intent you're putting behind it. Your example is perfect. Could you drive home and be more stressed out and frustrated and blow up at your family because you came out of a rough day at work and you spent the whole drive home just thinking how pissed off you are at this and like how you can't deal with going back to and now you come home just off the cuff. yeah, it actually could make things worse depending on how you handle that stress response. And I think that intentionality you're talking about of saying, no, I'm going to make a conscious decision to choose the steps that I take next. Because if I don't, and I just let my, emotions or whatever's going on with me run rampant, it's going to completely destroy you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm from Chicago, so we have plenty of traffic as well. But it really is how I decide to show up to that car ride home. Because trust me, I have been in the car where I'm like honking and yelling at the person next to me or whatever. And, sometimes it may be just letting off steam, and I guess that's okay. But, other times it tends to get me more wired up. So it's really just saying, okay, I'm going to take my time on this car ride home. I know it's going to be a long drive. I know there's going to be a lot of cars on the road. I know I'm going to get cut off, a million times, and I'm not going to take it personally. I'm going to just continue to focus on relaxing because this is my time right now, and that's okay.
Okay. Well, yeah, and I think that's a really important part that now that we're getting to here is that, and this is what I've seen with people who are more balanced, I would say, is they are more intentional about some of these things. They are more conscious of how they're choosing to respond and react and what they're doing, the way they're spending their time, instead of, again, just letting the day go by and letting whatever happens happen. That can actually contribute to some of this. But something else you brought up that I am curious, I have 2 points that I want to dig into with you. So first of all, some of what you talked about is how very personal this is to an individual. And I think there can be a tendency for us to want to stereotype or generalize or try and figure out like, what's the one way? And I think sometimes you see this in like wellness tips or things like this is like, here's the 3 things, Jessie, you can do to fix your situation. And it's like, well, that's probably not going to work because your personal situation, the way you handle stress, your emotional state, all that is very different than the way I do or the way others do. How do you help organizations navigate that? Because I do see in organizations, there's often a pressure to say, we need to try and figure out the thing that will work for everyone. And I see that in learning and development all the time. What's the one training that's going to make everyone a great leader? There isn't one. And I'm guessing the same thing is true with wellness. And so how do you see organizations navigate that well? Because that personalization, to me, makes total sense and is critical. You can't treat everyone the same, yet companies can't get involved in every single individual's life.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, preventative wellness is where I think organizations who succeed in having a successful wellness program start. Preventative wellness is something like stress management. Stress is universal. Everyone experiences it. We talked about 8 in 10 people have burnout. And so we can just start there.
And 10 in 10 have stress.
Yeah, 10 in 10 have stress. Exactly. We can start there, get everyone on the same page that, everyone is going through this one thing. That sort of opens the floodgates up for people to talk about other topics like sleep or nutrition or mindset.
So find those shared experiences that are universal for everyone, even though the way they may handle them isn't universal.
Yes. Yep. That's huge. And then the second piece is having a go-to for one-on-ones. So after I do these sessions, I open up an office for one-on-ones, and people will come to me with their specific questions that they want to talk about in private. And of course, there's dialogue that happens at the group level too. But if you can have one-on-one dialogue, this cannot be underestimated because people are yearning to share what they're going through, but they don't know who to share it with or how to say it. And so if they can say it in this really candid, not cute way and feel seen and heard, that is half the battle. So having that space, whether it's one-on-ones with your manager, whether it's offering therapy as a benefit, it could look a million different ways, but everyone needs to have that space where they can share freely and openly and safely.
Okay. It's funny you bring that up because the number of things that I've dealt with and just encountered with teams and interpersonal dynamics, people feeling understood and heard. Honestly, I've seen that de-escalate and decompress some of the most tense situations where people sometimes don't even need things to be fixed. They just
Right.
need to feel like someone sees and understands where they are and goes, that sucks. That's really hard. Like, I see exactly where you are right now, and I understand what you're wrestling with. And sometimes that in and of itself can be, I don't want to say that's all they need, but there are times where that is all you need, because
Yeah.
part of the frustration is you're dealing with all this internally and you just need an outlet and there's nowhere to put it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And not like therapizing it. So managers and leaders are not therapists. They're not meant to give this well-being recommendation of, here's what you should be doing. Go to sleep early, or get this nutrition plan in place, or exercise, or whatever it may be. It's really just meant to say exactly as you said, Christopher, like, I see you, I hear you, that sucks. How can I help? Those are the kinds of support that employees are really looking for.
Okay. So you brought something up that I'm curious your take on this,
Yeah.
because the role of a manager, this is a tough one,
Yeah.
because to your point, managers, I mean, you want to look at burnout statistics. Look at burnout statistics on people managers. That's probably where the 8, is getting bumped up. But I would guess it's probably even higher with people managers, because I mean, the number of people I tell them, like, if you want to be in people leadership, just be careful what you're signing up for, because doing it well can be a real challenge. Where do you see the role of the manager in that? Because I can see managers sometimes, one, feeling ill-equipped to handle some of this.
Mhm.
And there is this tendency to want to jump to solutions as a manager. Oh, you're feeling that way? Well, why don't you should go do this, or you should go do that, instead of going, okay, wow, that's tough. But also, to this point, sometimes that may not be the role of a manager, or asking managers to be that to all their people can be too much when they're
Yeah.
carrying everything else. So what do you see the role of the manager, and where is that line?
So you're absolutely right. Managers are one of the groups that are most likely to be burnt out. And the irony
Yeah.
is they're also the most able to stop burnout. So it's really this scenario
It's this
of,
self-perpetuating cycle where it's like the very people you need to help solve the problems
yeah,
are the ones who are struggling with it the most.
yep, exactly. And so it really is the scenario of put your own oxygen mask on first before helping
Okay.
others. So managers first need to take care of themselves. And this is where they can almost double dip by doing that role modeling. So that while they're taking care of themselves, they're showing and telling their team about how they're taking
What
care of
they're doing.
themselves. So the team then has permission. So that's really step one, is taking care of yourself. And while you're doing it, just be a role model. You're already doing it. So might as well just show and tell about it a little bit more. And then the
Right.
second is for the manager to know and educate the employees on clear pathways to the different benefits and resources within the organization that could help the employee. So rather than saying, you come to me in a one-on-one and I say, oh, there's a therapy benefit, you should go check it out. That's a little bit too personal, but it could be a manager having a team meeting where they're walking through with the entire team, unprompted. Here are the different resources that are in place at our company this year. I'd love to see you guys take advantage of them. If you have any questions, you can go to me or our HR business partner. Really just creating these clear pathways to different resources so employees know where they are, when to go to them, how they can find them. And a lot of times an HR business partner can also lead that meeting too. So really just being in touch with where the resources are and how employees can get to them in really a public space where you're not prescribing, but you're just showing and telling what's available.
Okay. Well, and I like the part that you hit on before, which I think is a message to people managers, which is modeling it and being open and vulnerable about modeling that. I think sometimes there is this pressure as a people manager to give this public persona that you've got it all figured out. Here's these resources that are available to you.
Yeah.
I don't need them. Like, I've got this stuff. And it can be hard to lean into that and go, I mean, I'm struggling just like every single one of you. And here's how I'm using that. And I can see that being a way to destigmatize some of this stuff, because it can be perceived. And I've been in plenty of organizations where it is perceived as like, oh, there's something wrong with you if you need help with this stuff, which is ridiculous when you look at the stats. It's like, no, if 80% of people are dealing with this, you're not the exception because you need some help.
Right. Yeah, and that kind of brings us to that next topic they were talking about, is that it's a costly problem when 80% of people are really struggling
Yeah.
with wellness issue that's making them less productive at work. It's increasing their absenteeism. And by the way, people who are experiencing burnout are 4 times as likely to end up in the emergency room as someone who's not. So there's a whole crux of costs that come along with people ignoring their wellness, sweeping it under the rug, not having a place to discuss it, not knowing they access pathways to different resources. It's very costly.
So because I have no doubt, and I was going to get to this point,
Yeah.
but this is sometimes one of the challenges I see with well-intended initiatives like this, is that, it can be perceived as, well, there's a cost affiliated with this. And so as an organization, yeah, we have the best intentions of doing this, but it's expensive or it's going to cost us something. And to me, that's an indicator. Well, don't say it's a priority. If you're not willing to put your money where your mouth is, it's really not a priority, because your wallet and your schedule tells me, like, I can look at anybody's bank statement and their calendar and I can tell you what's important to them. And I think the same is true for organizations. But how do you navigate that conversation with business leaders who may look at it and go, yeah, I mean, we really would like to get this better, but unfortunately, it's just not something that we can get behind financially, type of a thing. Like, how do you help them see that? Because sometimes seeing the costs that don't show up on a P&L sheet can be difficult when it's like, well,
Right.
there's a cost associated with this.
Yeah, I love to be data driven in my approach. So that's why the one-on-one conversations are really important, because they can inform a survey. Just throwing a survey out is not necessarily going to be effective. But if we have the conversations, open up this, trickling in of a wellness program, and then we do a wellness survey, we can really get to some numbers. So we can look at, are you burnt out, and give people the worksheet that I mentioned to assess themselves and then provide their answers. And maybe the organization is performing better than the 8 and 10 employees who are feeling burnt out. But according to Gallup, 8 and 10 people are feeling burnout all or some days. The cost of burnout per affected employee is about 18% of salary. So if you're looking at a company of 5,000 employees where the average salary is $50,000 per employee, the annual cost of burnout is $30 million a year. So that's a pretty significant cost.
It's a significant chunk of cash.
Yeah. And I can completely understand organizations being like, well, we're trying this already. We're doing the step competitions, we're doing the yoga, and we're not seeing any lift. And so that's where I really push for preventative wellness, because it has that 6-to-1 return versus a 3-to-1 return of reactive wellness, because we're stopping the problem before it happens. So,
okay, so let's break down the difference between those two, because I think that's that's a significant difference. So a 6-to-1 in terms of impact versus 3-to-1, those are numbers that a business leader can get behind, going, okay, well, if there's a double 200% higher chance that this is going to have an impact, that makes a big, and I think there's a pretty good value prop right there. 18% of your salary, that's a business cost with that. But when you talk about preventative versus reactive, how do you help break that down? Because there probably are people who watch and listen to this who may say, well, we are doing things. But to your point, it's, well, which ones are you doing? Are they reactive or are they preventative? And how can people diagnose, well, which one is that we're investing in right now?
Yeah. So if we just think about even what preventative, like someone is not already sick, and we're giving them these tools ahead of time to enhance their well-being. So maybe they are feeling, a 5 or 6 out of 10, and there are these tools now in place to help them get to an 8 or 9 out of 10. That would be preventative wellness. That's, stress management, nutrition, education, encouraging exercise. That's preventative wellness. When we look at reactive wellness, it's the employee is already, when we ask them about their well-being, they're at a 1 or a 2 out of 10. They have many different symptoms. They are, going to the doctor, getting many labs. They're trying to figure out what's going on with them. Anything from that point on is going to be reactive. So this could be, offering different benefits and increases there. And those are great. Those are much needed. But if we never let the employee get to that point, then that's where we see that 6-to-1 return.
Okay. Well, and something that you talked about in this, and I think this is something that I would encourage, not just with wellness, but a lot of things. Some of the examples you gave earlier on really tied to helping people understand what's at the root of the problem for them. I look at a lot of the solutions that I see organizations implement. They tend to be high cost things, but they also don't necessarily help you. They assume that you already know that this will be a solution for you. So again, as an example, is a yoga class or something like that, is that bad? No, not necessarily, but it's jumping off the assumption that people already know that the solution for them is to take a yoga class versus some of these more diagnostic type things that you described that actually help organizations and individuals in the organization say, what really is going on underneath the surface that's contributing to this so that I can diagnose the problem and start at the root of it versus, because I think some of these post situational ones, they're fine, but as soon as it's over, you're right back where you were, where you started, because you don't really know what's going on underneath it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I love yoga. I'm a yoga teacher. So I believe.
Right. Is that right? You're not discouraging that, but it's one of those like going beneath the surface on it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would think of those, yoga, happy hour, gym membership. These are great benefits. They can increase employee morale. And if somebody is already in a really good place with their wellness, this can absolutely, help them in terms of, they already have a workout routine and now they have a free gym that they can go to. Great. But if someone is struggling, these are things that are not necessarily going to get them over the hump to feeling better. Even though they're nice to have and organizations should continue to offer them because they are great, they're not going to help with an individual who has a serious wellness issue.
Right. Well, because I think of some of those things like, we won't pick a specific type of class, but let's say there's an offering that's middle of the day type of a thing. And you're encouraging people, hey, take time out of your day to go to this thing. It's going to help your wellness. If you're pushing that out to a group of people who already feel like they don't know how to get through their work in the day and they're bringing things home at night and all this other stuff, the risk you run is saying, here, fit this one other thing into your already packed schedule that's leading you to feel stressed out and burned out, and make sure you find time for it. Otherwise, you're not participating. And there can be a message to the organization that, well, I feel like I have to participate because if I don't, I'm sending a message to the organization that I don't value or appreciate these kinds of things. You actually may be exacerbating a underlying problem in your organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. And some of the companies that I've worked with have done these sessions on an employee retreat or like an employee, kind of like a more employee focused day where they have like a no meeting day and this is the only thing on the calendar. So that could be one way to approach is offering these sessions or these tools in spaces where employees can actually turn off the workday for a bit and feel safe to do so and focus on the session at hand. Another thing, again, and this modeling comes in handy again, is the most successful client that I've had, their CEO sat in the session and their CEO then took the tools and made them a part of the workday for the next 6-8 weeks after. And we surveyed 8 weeks later and their results were off the chart. It became part of their culture. And so if we have that modeling, from start to finish, it really boosts the results of any wellness program.
As I would expect, because going back to it, your CEO doing this stuff, it's one thing if the CEO is saying, hey, we have all these new wellness benefits for you. It's another thing if they go, I'm using them, I'm utilizing them, and I want to incorporate it into the way our organization works so that we can all get better together. It's of no surprise to me, whatever, that you would see a significantly greater lift. But I just think of some of these other things with the, you had mentioned, I think earlier in the conversation, the importance of offering a suite of resources to people and allowing them to figure out what works for them versus trying to be super prescriptive to folks. Because even just a perfect example of this that you mentioned that I know for me would have the opposite effect. Mm-hmm. Okay. So like the after work happy hour thing for me, hate it.
Yeah.
Absolutely hate it. I mean, I have 7 kids and a wife. Even when I used to go into the office, the idea of hanging out with my coworkers after work when I'm already trying to spend more time with my fam, like it would actually have the opposite effect. And again, it could contribute to, well, now your family's taking a back seat and maybe you're trying to be more engaged and involved in your family life. Now there's this pressure to be like, well, now I got to work outside of work hours, but it's supposed to be for my wellness. I mean, these kinds of things, you have to be so careful with prescribing them to people with a kind of blanket universal approach.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm getting my wellness coaching certification right now. And what we call this is bio individuality. So it's everyone is unique, and the right solution for one person can be the absolutely wrong solution for another person.
Right.
Let's say there was someone on your team, Christopher, who was dealing with loneliness, and they were here from a new city, and maybe they were, just feeling so disconnected. That happy hour could be exactly what they need. And so it really is just offering this suite of resources and having things available for employees to dip their toe in the water, educate themselves, so that way they can be autonomous in their wellness journey.
Okay. All right. So I will say, boss, if happy hour's at noon, you know what? Then that's a different story. But to that point, on this point and on this one, I remember when I was leading a team in person, I had an organization that was in person. I was really intentional about if we were going to do team building stuff, I did it during work hours because my whole thing was, okay, if I'm saying this is important, then it's more important than your work. So we're going to do it I'm not going to ask you to pack in your whole workday and then on top of it, ask you to do that. And so some of those things, I do think we have to be careful with that. But I think your point of allowing people the flexibility to figure out, hey, what do you really need? And I think to your point, and maybe you've experienced this, as you're approaching wellness in an organization, you have to set expectations for that with the leaders who are investing in it. Because I can see organizations going, well, 100% of people aren't participating. Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, exactly. Because they're not going to participate in all of this because this thing may be really great for a certain percentage, but for others, it may have the opposite effect. So do you see that we're helping people understand that, to help kind of get away from this one size fits all?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I have worked with organizations where they have had that nervousness before the session of like, is anyone going to go to this? Is anyone going to like this? And what I always recommend is starting with this like baby steps approach where you're offering and sprinkling in little wellness things before doing a session or before having a big wellness push, because it can be very what is the word I'm looking for? It can be just a little bit jarring if you have an organization who's never talked about wellness and all of a sudden they're going all in on wellness because maybe they learned about the cost of burnout or something. So it really
they learned that there's an 18% salary. So they're like, oh my gosh, we're going to talk about this everywhere. And employees are going, what is going on here?
Exactly. So there has to be an authenticity to it. And that really starts by, just gauging it, dipping your toe in the water, letting employees know what's available, letting them know that this is going to become important and a priority, and then, offering more and more resources as time goes on. But yeah, if you sort of just dump it all on them at once, it's going to be overwhelming.
Right. Well, and I think there is, just speaking from experience in organizations, there's always some initial skepticism. Like, is this just a flavor of the week thing? We're doing it this month because somebody was in a meeting and they heard some statistic. They listened to Learning Tech Talks and they heard some statistic about wellness. And so now this is the big thing. But by next month, we're never going to hear a thing. So I do think that healthy skepticism. And I think the stick with itness is, I don't know if that's actually a word, but right. Like that willingness to go, no, we're actually going to dig in and hang in there. Versus flash in the pan. Well, we didn't get what we wanted out of it, so now we're just going to pull it back out.
Right. Yeah, the consistency is.
Yeah. So my last question, which we're not even going to get close to unpacking this because I can't believe we're already 55 minutes in. But I'm curious your take on kind of the balance between the responsibility of the employee versus the responsibility of the organization. Because there is this spectrum where you can go, and I've seen this, organizations They do it with their career journeys too. Well, career development is on you. You need to own your own career, which in some ways is a way of being like, yeah, it's not really our problem, so you deal with it.
Yeah.
And then there's the other side where you can go, well, we're going to fix this for you. With this one in particular, like no organization can make you mentally and physically well. They can't do it. That is an impossibility. But sometimes organizations go down this path to try and be the savior to their employees. Where do you find that healthy balance in there?
I would say it's a 50-50 balance. It's a top-down approach and it's a bottom-up approach. So just as you just stated, if I'm sick and I work for an organization and then I go switch jobs to another organization, I'll probably still be sick when I'm there. But what changes is maybe the resources that are in place, the culture that's in place, the manager that I have, and how they really talk about wellness and how they model wellness, what the leadership is doing. And so really when I'm thinking about an organization who has a successful wellness program, they have different resources in place. They're trying new things, but they're really sticking with a baseline. Maybe it's pillars of wellness. So maybe the pillars are mindset, nutrition, rest, whatever they are. And they're creating content around those pillars all year long for employees to be able to reach out to throughout the year. Then the employee can be very autonomous. They can say, this is important to me. I'm going to start doing this during the day. I have this tool. It's going to become a part of my lifestyle, my work-life balance. They can be autonomous. And that's really just a partnership, right? The employee is autonomous in enacting these tools, and the organization is supportive in teaching and sharing these tools.
Okay. So for the organizations listening or the senior leaders that are listening, I think it's worth taking a look at. And I think what you brought up from the very beginning of this are the things that you're doing around this. Are they proactive in nature? And I really like the pillars that you mentioned. Do we as an organization have a holistic approach to addressing wellness? Not just responsive, reactive stuff that like, oh, after the fact, here's this stuff, but both a balance of proactive and reactive in this kind of balanced spectrum of stuff. Are we doing things to actually actively create an environment where people have the resources available? If you're not, then organizations, you do have a responsibility. And I think, again, it's not just a responsibility for no reason. You've hit on it earlier. There's a financial cost associated with failing to do this, which ties to your finances and your organizational performance. So it is a business problem, not a squishy, nice to have thing. But I think to your point, to employees, if you're the ones watching and listening, if you haven't explored what is available in your organization and what is out there, I think that is a task that you can take some time to do. I know that that's usually one of the first things that I've done with people on my teams before when they come to me with a challenge that they're dealing with is, what have you done to explore what's available to you? And if the answer is, well, nothing, okay, then you do have some responsibility to actually act on that. And if you're in that situation where you're waiting for the organization to fix it, I do think that is a push to folks to say, well, just make sure you're doing your due diligence as well. So a very healthy and well-balanced approach, which I would expect nothing less from you, Jessie.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I don't want to open up. There's another 3 topics that I was going to get into, but we aren't going to squeak those things in a minute and 15 seconds. So there's just no way. But I so appreciate you being here today. And I hope for people who are listening and watching this, who are thinking about, hey, how do we take care of our people well? And not just because we feel obligated, not just because it's a trend in work right now, but because really this is a business solution. And you know what, more than anything, caring about people will take you far. So thank you so much, Jessie, for being here and having this conversation with me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me, Christopher. It was a great conversation, and I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks everybody who joined live. Boss Peter, thanks for the comments along the way. And I appreciate everybody who watches and listens. We will see you next week, where I will be back again. And actually, no, I take that back. Next week, for those of you who are watching, I am pushing this to Thursday. So if you're watching on the usual time, it's not going to happen, because speaking of wellness, I'm off. for the Labor
Ooh.
Day weekend. I'm taking some days off, and I'm not going to be checking my emails. I'm not going to be doing that other stuff. So don't message me because I won't get back to you. So we will all see you next week, but at a different day, different time. See you on the other side.